Hello, I'm going to start today with our land acknowledgement. On behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here and might even be on the call. Additionally, we acknowledge the critical importance of uprisings for racial equity that continue across this country in response to generations of structural racism against Black communities. Black lives, Black minds, and Black voices matter. Thank you. And I am going to introduce to you. So I want to do an introduction. But first I want to say, because I always forget to introduce myself. I'm Amanda Knowles. I run the North Seattle College Art Gallery, where I also teach drawing and printmaking. I also want to acknowledge Karen Stoldreyer, who's my assistant and who is multitasking here today with with letting people in and the chat and a lot of other things that are happening. So thank you. Welcome and thank you for coming. As I've said before, in such a time where we are kept in place out of necessity, a lovely byproduct is that we can take advantage of the technology to have people who are not in our local vicinity come to speak to us. For the next couple of quarters, the North Seattle College Art Gallery has built a visiting artist lecture series around bringing in artists from around the country. Today, we hold the 5th lecture in this series and the last one of the quarter. It is a privilege to introduce you to Jason Rule, one of the master printers at Tandem Press. I was going to look up how many master printers there are, but I forgot.
There are 3.
3. Jason received his Bachelor's of Fine Arts from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and received a Master's of Fine Art in Painting from the University of Wisconsin-Madison at the same time that I did. So I know Jason from that. Along with being a master printer at Tandem Press, Jason is an artist, educator, and a lovely human. He's also a graphic designer, a gallerist with Red Rocket Gallery, right, from all those years ago, curator, and so much more. He has had numerous art exhibitions throughout the country and has held residencies at the Vermont Studio Center and Anderson Center in Minnesota. Please join me in welcoming Jason Rule, who will introduce us to Tandem Press, a place that I have a special place in my heart for because I got my MFA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and worked at Tandem Press each summer throughout the years that I was in graduate school. I cherish the time that I spent there working with artists. Ta-da, it's you.
Thank you, Amanda. And actually, thank you very much for having me. I think what I was thinking about doing for this is I will show slides for roughly the first part, and then technology, if it works, I will then go into the shop and kind of show the shop and a couple of the projects that we're working on right now. So I will do a screen share and we'll kind of just get going. So for people that aren't aware, Tandem Press is affiliated with UW-Madison, Wisconsin, and we were started in 1987. By Bill Wiege, who was a professor in the art department at the time. And he kind of envisioned Tandem to be a place where students in the grad program that were getting their degree could come to Tandem and see artists, professional artists working in a collaborative atmosphere with printers. And so we've been in 2 locations since we started. The image you're seeing now is our current shop. When Amanda and I were in school, we were in a different location. We basically had to leave that location about 7 years ago because they tore the building down. So we are now in our new space. We've been here, like I said, about 7 years. So, and if anybody has any questions, I don't know if you are cool with that, Amanda, but like, just feel free to throw out questions, or, you know, if I don't hear anything or see it in the chat, Amanda, if you just want to let me know.
Absolutely.
If there are things people want to know about. And that is just a photo of Bill Wiege in the old space on 201 South Dickinson Street, just working on some proofs by Richard Bosman. And then I have one other shot of the old studio. And that space was in an old warehouse that also had like the state car fleet in it, and a bunch of other kind of random things in the building. So there are 8 full-time employees at Tandem Press: the director, 2 curators, a financial specialist, and also events coordinator, preparator, and 3 printers. And one of the things that we do is we travel around the US and install things at art fairs, and that's just a way for us to get the prints that we make out into the world. So this is just an install shot with Sona, one of the curators, on the left, and Seth, our preparator, on the right. And this is the last exhibition that we were actually a part of right before kind of COVID lockdown. It was at the Armory Show in New York. And that is Sona in the middle, Mishka on the left, the other curator, and then on the right, Paula, our director. And then we also, at the same time, did the art on paper show in New York, and that is Rachel, our financial specialist / event coordinator. So a lot of people kind of wonder what it is actually we do in the shop as printers. And so I kind of picked about 4 different projects with different artists to kind of talk about the process of collaboration with an artist. And the first person that I'm going to talk about is Judy Pfaff, who is one of the kind of longest running artists that has worked with Tandem. And a lot of people ask, how do artists and Tandem connect? And that'll be another thing that I can kind of talk about with some of the people that I'm going to show. But Judy is one of the artists that has come back for, over 20 years. And when Judy comes to the shop, it becomes Judy's shop. Like it is, like ceiling to floor Judy. Some of the people that we work with, it's, they have an idea before they come in. They send us the idea and we work on maybe 1 or 2 things. They go on the wall during the proofing process. But Judy, it turns into her studio space. She very much immerses herself in images that are being created in the moment, and then just continually changes and works out her ideas while she's here. And her visits, usually maybe take like 2 or 3 visits of this kind of like working on a ton of stuff, then us sending it to her studio, her living with it for a while in her studio, sending back things that she's changed. And then, like us reacting to that, and then her coming back and, kind of going from there. So, this is just a shot of, we have 3 blocks that are kind of laid out, and she's just making marks of where she's going to want us to go in and carve shape. Because like, depending on the artist, like kind of depends on how hands-on the artist may be versus how hands-on the printer will be, like in terms of like carving blocks or, inking things up. Like Judy very much is always a part of that process. And so then as printers, once Judy has kind of made some decisions, color choices, we will print things to put them on the wall for her. So this is just, on the right is Joe, one of the printers. And this is just us kind of going through and pulling proofs so we can then put things on the wall. And again, like we actually have like fake walls that we put up and take down just for Judy's visit. Because again, like we don't even have enough wall space to usually accommodate all of the stuff that she generates. And, scale wise, these are roughly 8 feet by 4 feet. They are composed of 3 wood blocks that are put together and then printed as one full image. And the reason it's 3 wood blocks is because we carved these blocks with a laser engraver. Because of the intense amount of detail that was in them, we worked with a hacker space in town and rented, time on their laser. But the laser is only so big. So we basically made the blocks as big as we could, and that came out to 3 trips to make 1 block. And then this is, the final piece of the image that you kind of see Joe and Judy taking a look at right there. And so this piece, the under layer is inkjet, and then it's a wood block that's printed on Kozo paper and then shellacked, so it becomes very transparent. And then the black that's in the woodblock area is hand painted caustic that Judy went back and did after the printing. And so again, like she very much is like making all of these decisions like while she's putting things together. And then what we do is during this process, we're taking notes, like how she was able to achieve certain things, like what colors she was using to do the painting and things like that. So that once she signs the proof as an RTP, which means right to print, basically saying like, this is what I want the edition to look like, then we will go back and edition, but it might not be, depending on the production schedule, it might not be for 6 months that we go back and work on something. So we always want to make sure that we're keeping a lot of notes, because you think you wouldn't forget certain things, but then when you go back into it that much later, you really need to be able to go back and cross-reference. Otherwise, you might not be able to replicate what was done during the visit. And so the next artist I'm going to talk about is Jim Dine. And one of the reasons I wanted to show this just is because it's Jim Dine using a chainsaw to carve a wood block, which that was the first time I had ever seen anyone using a chainsaw to carve a block. So he basically was out in the courtyard of the old space and just started going to work on this image. And at times I wasn't out there, Joe was out there, and he was somewhat afraid that because like the chainsaw would kick back occasionally and go towards Jim's head. And he was really terrified that Jim Dine might injure himself while in our shop, but luckily he didn't. So the reason that I kind of brought this up is this project is an example of, to me, one of the main things that I enjoy about printing, and I feel like the other 2 printers are, and it's the problem solving aspect of printmaking. Like we're presented a problem by the artist, and how do we solve it? Like how do we get to the point that the artist is happy with the image that's created? And so the image that I'm starting off with, Jim, right before the end of a visit, we had proofed this image to this point, and he was like, yeah, I love it. It's great. Do an edition of 18, and when I come back to sign the other prints, we'll sign this one too. We were like, oh, great. So this is a collograph, which gives you like the kind of red area, and then 1 run of woodcut, which is the kind of blue-gray, and then an etching, which is the dark area that really gives you the form of the heart, and kind of that etching plate stops right before the bottom of the print, and that's very intentional. Like Jim liked how that separated those 2 areas. So we pulled this edition, and he came back in to sign the other prints that we had worked on, and he looked at it for like 3 seconds, and he was like, oh no, this isn't gonna work. I don't want to do this at all. Like we got to do something else. We were like, oh, okay. What do you want to do? And he was like, oh, well, maybe we could do some litho on it. I can paint out some Mylars and I'll send them from my studio, and you can work from there. And we were like, we can't really do litho this large because this piece is roughly like 3 feet by 6 feet. So our presses wouldn't take that. So we were like, oh, I don't know if we're gonna be able to do that. And he's like, oh, okay, we'll figure something out. And he went back to his studio, and like a month later, Mylars showed up, and he's like, here are the Mylars for those lithos that we're gonna do. And we were like, we can't do this. So how are we gonna do it? And Joe and I kind of were on opposite sides of the shop, and we both just said like, you go your way, I'll go my way, and let's just think about it. Like just kind of figure out how to approach this subject if we can't do litho. And at the time, the shop wasn't really set up for screen printing, but that's basically where we both landed, is like screen print would be the way to go. So because we're a part of UW, we contacted John Hitchcock, who's an instructor at campus, and asked if we could use his screen printing table because it would be large enough to accommodate this print. And he was like, yeah, that'd be great. So then we kind of priced out how much it would be to get screens and a lot of the other necessary materials. And then we approached the director and said, this is what we think we're probably gonna have to do. This is what we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to go to campus, but we've approved it with John. He said we could use a space, like students will be out of class during this time. And then we approached Jim after that and said, this is what we think we should do. And he was like, great, because we weren't, that's the thing, is we weren't sure if he like had some weird aversion to screen printing. Like, you never know, like some artists just, there are techniques they don't like. So luckily he was like, yeah, that sounds great. So then this is the first set of Mylars that he sent to us. So it was 4 runs that we added to it. And we thought, oh, awesome. He's going to love it. We're going to be done. He'll sign it. And we sent it to him. And then we ended up getting like 4 more Mylars back. And we, not that we didn't, want to do it, but we were just really, we couldn't believe that there'd be that much more that he could do to it. So then this is just a shot of us up on campus using the, the equipment up there. And then it also, like, it reminded me when we were doing this, like how comfortable you become in your own shop. Like, you just know where everything is. Like, you know where the rags are, where this is and that is. And so like you suddenly, we're commuting up to campus from Tandem, which is, like 5 miles apart. So it's like, you don't want to forget anything. And then the one thing that we never even took into account is like, we have large drying racks at Tandem because we work, a lot of times very large scale. So we had to line these up on the floor of the Humanities building, which we were terrified of because we thought that for some reason, like Paula, the director of Tandem, would come down just to see how things were going. And she would see that we had all these dime prints just on the floor of the Humanities building and ask us what are we thinking. But that was the only way we were going to be able to do that. And so Amanda is probably very familiar of how long that is, like from the very end of that image to, the foreground. And this was during like summer break. So luckily there was not anybody coming through the hallways, except for there was one day where suddenly where we were printing, I heard someone dribbling a basketball. And I went out into the hall and there's this kid like just dribbling a basketball down, like right next to the prints, like going down the hallway. And I was freaked out because I thought for sure he was going to like end up, doing it on a couple of the prints, but luckily he didn't. So this is the final piece. And the thing I also thought was really great about this image is that Jim had a show at Pace Gallery in New York, and it was all abstract paintings. And so like this was this really great hybrid of like his hearts from, like kind of the one of the series that he's really well known for, but then taking this very new work that he had been doing and kind of pulling them together. And, again, like that, just that whole kind of start to finish of the process where it was just Joe and I like brainstorming the whole time, like how to get from point A to, point Z. And then the next artist I'm going to talk about is Robert Cottingham.
Can I ask a quick question first? With Judy's work, there was a question that was, how do you replicate Judy Pfaff's encaustic marks? And or she's painting them each time.
So it depends. Like there are times when Judy has done like all the hand painting on things, but if not, like we cut stencils for like specific shapes that she's going to work with and then use those stencils. There have been times in the past where someone actually had a phone and was capturing her painting to really get that idea. Like we try to mix really large batches of like the alcohol-based dye that she usually uses. So that's all ready to go when we go back into it. And so it's like trying to, because then there's also that kind of spontaneity of it that you're trying to capture over and over and over. So it kind of depends on the project, but a lot of times we will do it in-house after we've seen Judy do it on the RTP.
Thank you. And then there's one more question, which is people can hear the trains in the background and they're wondering exactly where you're located.
So the building that we're in now is an old train roundhouse. So we are right off of the train tracks. They shake the building quite frequently. So if you're familiar with Madison, we're near where the old Oscar Mayer plant used to be on Commercial Avenue. But yeah, so we're in
campus.
That's a train tracks.
Yeah, and not on campus, right?
No, not on campus. We weren't on campus. We've never actually been on campus. There was a time where there was talk of trying to find a space for us on campus and build a new space. And that once we moved here, that kind of went to the wayside because everybody kind of fell in love with the space that we're in, because it is an old building that has a lot of exposed brick, woodwork, window. Like, it's just a really beautiful building. And I think a lot of people, they've always wanted us to move to campus, just obviously so we're on campus. But the old building had, I love that space, but it was a pretty rough space. Like, there were no windows in the studio, no ventilation. There wasn't a lot of heat in the winter. So I think that once we came to this space, like, the idea of moving maybe didn't seem as important for those reasons. So this is Joe in Robert Cottingham's studio. And again, like, the reason I bring this one up is because Joe and I drove work out to McLean Thomas's studio in Brooklyn and then up to Connecticut to Bob's studio to have him sign work, just because it was so much work that in terms of shipping it, we were kind of afraid of what might happen while we were doing that. So we just figured it would be easier, since there was so much going that way, to drive out and do that. So in the process of meeting with Bob in his studio and having him sign, we kind of started to talk about the next project that we wanted to do with him. And he's a photorealistic painter. He's really well known for his painting of signage. Like, you can see the painting in the back left. And so we talked with him. The project that we are kind of really well known for with Bob is the American alphabet, which is a series of each letter of the alphabet, a series of lithographs. And so we wanted to try something that we hadn't done with him. And the idea, he's done paintings of like antiquated things like cameras and typewriters and whatnot. So we decided, if Bob was interested, we would like to do a typewriter piece with him. And so in the drive back from Connecticut to Madison, Joe and I were basically like, all right, how are we going to do it? What, we hadn't done any woodcut really with Bob. And so we were like, let's try a woodcut. But then we also were thinking, with the nature of that image, how would we do a woodcut? So what we decided is we would try to use a laser engraver to do the key block, because the idea of like carving the characters and the letters on the keys, it didn't seem feasible. And, in terms of the scale, this is roughly like 35-ish. So we decided that we would use the laser engraver to produce the key block, and then we would carve all the other blocks by hand. And this is, again, this is going to that hackerspace in town. But we were getting to the point where we were like, we probably should have a laser at Tandem, just because a lot of projects, it started coming up as like the thing that we should use for the project. So then that is the key. And then we inked the key up, transferred that to a piece of paper, then transferred that to a block so that we could then hand carve the rest of the blocks. And so sometimes people will ask, like, what happens to the blocks after you're done? And a lot of them are destroyed. But we do keep some, like this one, we keep on hand because we are part of the university and education is a big part of what we do here. So we like to keep blocks like this for when tours come in and things like that, just so we can show people the process. And then that's the final print. So then the next project that I was going to talk about is McLean Thomas project. This image is from her first visit to Tandem. And when we decided that we were going to work with McLean again, we really had, it just kept kind of falling through because of like time commitments on her end and what was going on in the shop. So we eventually kind of landed on trying to work through the mail with McLean just to get the project going. And that's kind of where we're at right now with a lot of projects, just because we aren't having any artists come in during COVID. So I thought this would be kind of an interesting thing because it's one of the first ones recently that we did where we did proofing through the mail. And so the first image, this is the first proof that we sent to McLean. So I'm not sure if you can really tell, but there are notes all over it. So we shipped it out to the studio and then she just made notes, like the one kind of in the bottom middle on the left just says gold foil for, like, she's talking about those flowers that are on those two images there. And, you know, just all those spots had all those different little kind of notes. And so then we kind of reinvestigated, like, well, how are we going to do, you know, this or that? Because this is roughly about 27 different printed elements that are cut up and collaged together to make one print. So, you know, like roughly top left on the background is like solar plate etching, and then the top right is screen print. You've got archival inkjet, you've got some chincolet, there's relief, there is collage. And that goes back to like the first time we worked with Mickalene, and she said before she came in, I want to do everything that you do in the shop. Like, so we did every technique that we do in the shop. And we just, you know, we kind of replicated that with this piece. So just based on these notes, we changed the way that we approach certain aspects of it. Like they just became different techniques. Or when she said gold foil, we pretty much knew that was probably where we were going to have to go, because she wanted that to be like reflective. And there's just, no matter how hard you try in printmaking, like usually you're never going to get like a shiny metallic to be like that hyper shiny kind of thing. Like, and we tried a bunch of different things thinking like, yeah, this time it'll be it, but it never was going to work. So we found a place in town that does foil stamping. So we just printed flats of paper, took it to them, and they foil stamped for us. So after, you know, after making all the changes, and then this is just kind of like the way that we put those pieces together. So all of those things have acid-free dry mount tissue on the back after they're printed. And then we have a digital cutter that cuts all the shapes. So they're all being cut by machine, so they'll all fit together the same every time instead of like being hand cut, which is what we did, you know, before we had that cutter. And so put everything in place, and you can see in the foreground a tacking iron, because that material is a heat sensitive material. So then you can tack it down, it stays in place. And then once like the whole first layer was down, we would put in a dry mount press, heat set everything, and then put the second layer on top. And you can see there's a mylar that's kind of flipped up, and that's just the, you know, the matrix, and we flip it down to show you where all of the separate pieces go. And then that is the finished piece with all of the changes. And that was three times of proofing through the mail with Mickalene.
That's an addition of how many?
That's an addition of 24, I believe.
So there are 24 of these in the world, and you got to piece 24 of those together.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is like each area had to be additioned, and then the whole thing had to be. And then we have like a little cheat sheet just to show all of the different things that kind of went into the piece. And so again, like the reason I picked this one is one, because of like that process of working through the mail, whereas like when an artist is here and in the shop, you have those conversations like in real time, like I want this to be orange, this needs to change, this needs to go here. But when you're proofing through the mail, it really slows that thing down, because it's like you got to ship it to them depending on what their schedule is like in their studio. So it, like this project took 6 months to get through the proofing, just because of all the back and forth and whatnot. Like, so it would get worked on, get put away, come back out, get worked on, put away.
And part of that, the sadness of not being able to come in, is that a lot of artists kind of, when they're in the studio, you can kind of see them taking advantage of their surroundings and kind of changing tiny little things about their work because of being at Tandem, right? So
yeah,
I mean, I don't mean she would change how she works, but, you know, little added extra bonuses of being outside of your normal place.
Yeah, and like, you know, I mean, people will come here and they suddenly have 3 printers and students that are, the shop is only working on their work while they're here. Like we put all the other work away that people are you know, additioning and whatnot. And so it's, you know, when you've got that many hands suddenly that can do so many different things, like you can also try a bunch of different things in a short amount of time that maybe you wouldn't think of or do, because of like exactly what you're saying, like that kind of environment and vibe that you get from the atmosphere, you know, when they're here. And then another way that we pick artists is sometimes an artist we've worked with will say like, oh, have you ever thought about working with this person that I know? So Mickalene introduced us to Derek, and we were very aware of Derek's work. And so we were like, yeah, that'd be great if you could introduce us. And so Mishka was in New York for the IFPD print fair and went to Derek's studio, talked to Derek about what he was thinking in terms of what he would like to work on, and then sent some photos back to the shop. And then we just kind of, again, like started to think about how we could achieve, you know, or work on the image that he wanted to work on. And we generally try to do that too, whereas like we like to have something and live with it for a while in the studio on the wall to decide how to go about it, like to really think about what technique would be the one to use. Because we pretty much utilize all techniques here. Like we don't specifically focus on etching or lithography here. We just try to go with what we think is going to do the best job. And so Derek expressed interest in working on a self-portrait that he had done from his Floater series. And so we knew right away that we were going to use a laser to do like a puzzle block for this piece, which this is just the breakdown of the drawing in Illustrator to show you how the print, you know, kind of came out. So that was the first blocks to print that blue background. And then when I say puzzle block, it basically means that each of those pieces that you see now that have been printed inside of that form are their own individual pieces that are inked up and put back into a matrix to be printed. So you would print that many colors in one run each time. But because you're doing it as a puzzle block, pieces that are next to each other cannot be on the same block because you'd get a white gap in between the colors. So we had to map it out how to split this into 6 different blocks to carry all the different blocks. And so this is just, you know, would be run 4, run 5, and then the last run. And then we also wanted to get, like, by the time Derek came to the studio, we wanted to be into doing the first proof. So maybe the first day he would have something on the wall to look at so we could start to decide what needed to change instead of spending the first 3 or 4 days of the visit getting to that point. Because usually an artist is only here for about a week. So you only have a short amount of time to try and get to like a finished piece or the RTP. And Joe would probably really hate me for saying this, but then after this run, it was the final run. And because we were rushing and, you know, like really wanted to get something done, we printed the last run backwards. So we went to show Derek the final run, and the head, you know, like, so the head of the float was backwards. And instead of him just like looking at us like didn't know what we were doing, he's like, oh, I get it. He's like, I know what it's going to look like. He's like, that's all right. That's great. He's like, so we just, you know, went back to square one and started reproofing. But that was also the first time we worked with Derek, and slightly embarrassing that we had spent all that time on something and then proofed it backwards. And then this is the final piece. And there's also some gold leaf collage elements on this. So the horn, the tooth, the chain are all pieces of paper that were gold leafed and then collaged on after. And then the fingernails were also collaged on afterwards. And that's roughly, it's close to 100 different pieces for the puzzle block that made up the entire image. I'll talk about one more artist and then I can get to the tour of the shop. So this is Jeffrey Gibson. The way that we started working with Jeffrey is he had a show at the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art. So he was in Madison and he came to Tandem to visit the space while he was preparing for that show. And then we just started talking about if he would ever be interested in coming to Tandem and making work. And he said he was, but he had a project that was coming up where he was doing an installation at a major museum show. And he wondered if we would be interested in printing on drums, which we said, yeah, that would be great. But right away in our heads, we were like, okay, how are we going to do this? This is a 3-dimensional surface because these drums are already stretched and ready to use in a performance. And he has a person that he's worked with for a long time now that prepares all of his drums for his performances. And so the project originally was going to be 50 drums with a design and then one other thing. But then it turned into, it was 5 different gradients and 50 different texts. So it became a lot more difficult than we originally thought it was going to be, but that's, we were cool with it, and that's how we roll. So the first thing, was to print all the gradients, and then just to show you like the registration system that we used. Again, because it's a 3-dimensional surface, we had to build something that it could sit in, and then you can kind of see at the very top there are the clamps where the screen would go into. So there are the clamps right there. And then the 5 different texts for this blend were printed, because it's the same blend, just spun 180. And then that's the installation of all the drums. And so then in doing this project, then we just finished working on 2 additioned pieces with Jeffrey. The work is, I believe, leaving his studio on Wednesday to come back to Tandem, because we shipped it all out there for him to sign. Is there any questions at this point?
Doesn't look like there's specific questions at this point.
All right, so I'm gonna have Seth, the preparator, come up with his phone, and then he's gonna follow me through the shop. So again, if anybody wants to ask any questions quick while we're waiting for him to come up, and hopefully technology-wise it'll work. It's my first time switching from this to that.
And feel free to unmute yourself and ask live if you feel the need.
What was the species of plywood for laser or hand cutting, and how thick is it?
We try to use 1/2 inch when we're doing anything with the laser, and I mean just in general, because then it'll be a lot more kind of rigid than if it was 1/4 inch. It might kind of want to buckle, or if we're carving by hand, if we can, we like to use Sheena or a lot softer kind of wood. But with the laser, we're using Baltic birch, because you don't want to have any voids in the wood or anything like that, or like a lot of glue layers for the laser to have to deal with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How does it work financially with the artist? How do you set up that negotiation or?
So in general, it's usually the breakdown would be that unless the artist wants to take 1/3 of the edition to sell on their own, we keep all of the prints and we do the sales, and then the sales break down to basically like 1/3 will go to the artist, 1/3 stays with Tandem, and 1/3 pays for the production costs, is kind of the general outline of how we do things. If we do mono prints, the artist will take some of the mono prints just right away, and we'll take some, and then we don't divide any of the sales up. And I believe Sona and Mishka are on this Zoom meeting, so if I'm misspeaking, please correct me. But yeah, and so like that's kind of the agreement that's sent to the artists before they come in.
And you all know that mono prints are one-of-a-kind prints.
Thank you.
I mean, it makes sense, but.
Daphne is asking a question about artists that you enjoyed most working with, or who is your favorite artist to work with?
They actually, and I'm not saying this to like try and get around like saying that some people are terrors. Everyone that I've worked with has been really amazing. And I think part of it is because I think they're so appreciative when they come into the space, and we're just trying to do whatever we can to like make an awesome image. And so everyone, like some people are maybe more involved in the hands-on, some are more receptive to like asking like for your feedback about certain things. But I think it's also one of the, like the more that you work with an artist, the more comfortable you become with them, and the more open kind of the dialogue is, and the vibe in the shop becomes, the energy changes and stuff like that. I honestly wouldn't say there's been anyone that I was just like, oh, that person was a terror. I would never want to work with that person again.
And you have your personal favorites, but it's not
Yeah, but it's
like what the,
probably be more visual than personality. Like there's just certain artists that like their work is, I just love it, you know. So this is the curatorial area, and we'll just go back down in the shop. So this is Joe Fry, and he is proofing an Alison Saar print right now. So he's got this set up that once he gets the block put in here, his paper has been punched. So the punches will go on these registration pins, and then he'll be able to roll the sheet of paper out across the block. Just centering that little piece. Well function. Yeah. So then the next thing that'll happen is the hair will get printed in gold with screen printing, and then Joe will print the key on top of that. You can see on the wall, once we go over to the second part of the shop, what it's going to look like when the key and the hair are printed. So once that's ready to go, we'll send a digital image to Allison to see if it seems close to what she's thinking, and if it is, then we'll ship it to her so she can see it in her studio. So here's a laser engraver that we now have in the shop. And also we have our large etching press and really large wood cuts on. And then we have a conversion press that is, you can use for either lithography or etching. Right now it's set up for etching just because we're doing more etching projects than litho. You can see on the wall, these are the proofs that we've kind of been working on with Allison.
Oh,
I believe we're back.
You guys get to see the SAR prints in the block?
So those are just the proofs that we've got right now for that we've been sending to Allison, and she's been kind of telling us the corrections that she's wanted. So the one on the far right is
that's what you just printed?
yeah. And then Patrick is getting set to start the additioning of the Derek Adams print that we're going to work on next. And you can see on the wall the RTP. And so it's screen print. And then the party hat is relief printed and collaged on. And the dress is screen printed on book cloth and collaged on.
RTP is
Right to print.
right to print.
So that's kind of the artist signing off on it, saying this is what I want the edition to look like the visual contract. The kind of newest addition to Tandem is the Technology Center. So we had a generous grant from a supporter, and so with it we were able to get a 3D printer, a large format scanner, digital plotter to do cutting of collage materials, a new polymer plate maker to make relief plates for the Vandercook press, and Epson 9900.
How big does the Epson print?
44 wide by whatever. So you can see we've started cutting the party hats out. The cutter reads these crop marks and then knows exactly where to cut the image out. Is there anything else? Because I know we're a little bit after 3 at this point. Does anybody have any other questions or anything they want to see in the shop?
It's so great to be able to see how sort of large scale that shop is.
Yeah, it's the same size as the old shop in terms of square footage. It's just that it's all in the same spot instead of being spread out through an entire building,
Yeah.
which is nice.
Thank you, Jason.
I guess there's also back here. So then litho press, exposure unit for silkscreen, 2 Vandercook presses for relief printing. So like this is the press that party hat was printed on, and this is the plate that was used, like the relief plate. Washout screens and any sort of etching. And then we also have a frame shop and a wood shop to do any of the framing of the Judy Pfaff pieces, because she designs all the frames for her work. That's a swoon project that we're working on right now, a 3-dimensional print. But it's not printed with 3D printer. It's layers of litho that are attached to wood and then stacked together. And then we also have a gallery space, and we have a project assistant every year, and our project assistant is able to have their MFA show in our gallery.
There's a question about the student opportunities for work and internships at Tandem. I know you're connected, and like, how does that actually work?
So we have graduate students that work at Tandem, UW affiliated graduate students. Occasionally we have had undergrads work here. And then in summers past, there have been students from schools like in Florida and other places that get a grant from their school to pay for their summer of living here, and then they intern in the shop. So that's just a matter of if a student is interested in that, kind of getting a hold of us, letting us know the plan, letting us figure out what kind of work we're going to have over that summer, if there would be enough for students to have something to work on, and then go from there. Right now, we only have the one student that's working in the print shop just because of COVID restrictions and having enough space for everybody to be able to be distanced.
Fabulous. I think people are really appreciative to have gotten the tour, to be able to go through the rooms that you all work in and see it all. So thank you so much for that, as well as just the time that you took to sort of tell us what you do. Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I know there are a lot of people who are like, want to be printmakers now. Yeah, if somebody's in Madison in non-COVID times, can people come by and see?
Yeah, definitely. Like, just reach out if you're ever in town, and someone here will be able to give you a tour for sure.
All right. Thank you so much.